Frank Sorokach, Penn State's Scranton,
Thank
to
you.
bring us home.
All right.
To bring us home. To bring us home.
I'm not sure if putting me at the end was good or bad. I guess you get to decide.
Dr. Wilkerson, it's all because of you, man.
The faster I go, the faster you get alcohol,
Penn
right?
State Scranton in the house. Here we go.
Cyrus, is this thing recording? Can you? Some of this you'll need to get out of here. So I like to say controversial stuff, folks. So I may say some things that sound a little bit crazy, but that's the future, right? We're moving into a really, really turbulent future. And ultimately, what I'm going to talk about here it answers a lot of things that came up earlier today. So a lot of slides I'm going to go quickly because these things have been discussed. So when we talk about generations, we've already talked about that. I'm going to go fairly quickly. So I'm going to talk about friction in the hiring process, which we all know at this point in time, it's exceptionally difficult to find good people, right? If you talk to anyone that owns a business, is in human resources, is looking for people, the only thing we hear is, I can't find anyone. So this is called friction that slows down the process of finding the correct people. So there is a way to reduce that friction. And this is in the form of digital credentials. This topic has come up several times today. And especially over the lunchtime topic that was discussed with the faculty that were on the panel, Rodney asked a great question. Rodney really said, what's the future? You're going to be totally disrupted. What is it going to look like in the future? How will things be different? And digital credentials are likely to be that great disruptor that completely changes the way that things work in the hiring process. So I call these digital credentials because it encompasses various things which you will see momentarily. But most of you know these by the name of digital badges. And you can see the icons over here on the right. If you go into someone's LinkedIn profile, you see a badge. A badge is something kind of similar to what we saw with Scouts. So if you think about Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, in fact, I think I've got one here. Yes, I happen to have my Girl Scout patch here that I earned. What's interesting is I truly earned this, and it is a Girl Scout patch. I'm not going to tell you how or why, but I'm not the only man in the audience that has one. Isn't that right, Jim?
That's so true.
So, true story. So these are fashioned after these patches that Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts attained. So these are a verifiable way to determine skills. People tell us all the time, I know how to do something. And we say, maybe you do, maybe you don't. How do we know for sure that that person knows how to do something? A digital credential is a verification. Now, we're in the early days of digital credentials. So I'm going to go through the history real quickly, show you what that looks like. But ultimately, what you want to keep in mind is this is a verifiable way. So if I say that I know Microsoft Excel, you can tell for sure, based on a digital credential, that I know Microsoft Excel. And I'll show you what that process looks like. So digital badges came about 10 years ago. And these were started essentially by the Mozilla Foundation. So if any of you use browsers, you're familiar with that term. They're an industry that works in the browser industry predominantly, but they created this in tandem with the Gates Foundation as well as the MacArthur Foundation. There was a grant to put this together. Ultimately, the idea behind digital credentials was for the individual to own their education. So if you think about a typical college degree, who owns a college degree? How do you know who owns the college degree? The diploma, the transcript. If you need transcripts to change jobs, how do you get those? You have to beg for the registrar to give those to you. And folks, if you've never had to do that, begging is probably not even adequate to explain the difficulty in the process. The institution owns your college degree, but you can own digital badges. You own them as the individual who accomplishes that credential. So this is the origination, if you will, of the idea of a digital credential. Now, what's friction, right? So friction is anything that slows down processes. So if you work with equipment, you know that anytime equipment slows down, it's friction typically stopping that. And let's talk about that for a few minutes. What causes friction? Well, historically, when we hire someone, a person has to review a resume. When a person reviews a resume, historically, studies show it takes about 5 to 10 seconds. So you get a 5 to 10 second look at the resume. Imagine sitting with a pile of 1,000 resumes. How long are you going to spend on any single resume? It's going to be seconds, and you're flying through those resumes. Furthermore, there's a lot of research that shows this. Things like the person's name and other subjective factors can determine if someone says, yeah, maybe I want to hire that person, or maybe I don't want to hire that person. So there's all this subjectivity that comes into play when a hiring manager is looking at a pile of resumes. That's the history of friction in the hiring process. And this is the literature that supports this idea of this process. So Michael Spence and Joseph Stiglitz were economists in the 1970s who developed this model. This model actually technically explains how it works. So we signal, when we are a job seeker, we signal the skills that we have. And when I'm an organization hiring someone, I'm screening what that person is telling me. So this is from the literature. These two economists won a Nobel Prize for these concepts in 2001. And if we're successful, so think about the match that has to occur. If I tell you exactly the right way what you want to hear, I as the job seeker, you as the prospective employer, if I tell you exactly what you want to hear, I get a pass and I get hired. That's exceptionally difficult to do. Historically speaking, it's really hard to do because we've got humans involved, and humans are good at messing stuff up. So let's fast forward. We don't use humans anymore to hire. We use applicant tracking systems. So most of you are familiar with the organizations at the top of the slide here. So you look for a job, you go to apply, and let's say you go to Indeed and you apply for a job. What happens next in the automated process that exists in 90% of all hiring today is that resume gets kicked into an applicant tracking system. So this is the applicant tracking system which manages the process for hiring a person. And what happens is, at a certain point, the applications are scanned and ranked. And it's at this point that friction occurs. So let's say that I'm an organization that is looking to hire someone who knows pivot tables. And I put into the screening mechanism, into the applicant tracking system, I want someone that knows pivot tables. And the job seeker says, I know Excel. The system says, you are not a fit for the job because you did not explicitly state that you know pivot tables. That person gets kicked out, even though they are completely qualified for the job. And this is from a Harvard report last year of about 7,000 people. 88% of people that feel they're qualified for a job get kicked out due to the applicant tracking system, because there is different language used. How I signal is not how you screen. And so the mismatch means I get kicked out, I never get to apply for that job. So these are the issues. Hard skills, soft skills. How do I tell someone I'm a really good talker? Like, how do you put that on a resume? How do you put that in an application? That's not easy to do. So we need some sort of standardization to standardize hard skills, soft skills, and to be able to speak the same language. This is where digital credentials enter the equation. So digital credentials are really any alternative system. I talked about badges, but badges are just one form of a digital credential. So look at what the private sector is doing. Google has its own curriculum, and they're training people the way they want people to be trained. They're saying, we're not waiting for higher ed to train people, we'll do it ourselves. Who are you gonna bet on, higher ed or Google? Like, when you think about it, who are you gonna bet on in the long run? Google has all the data, they know how to use it, they know exactly what they want, they're gonna do what they want, and they're gonna train people the way they want. So then Facebook looks at that, Microsoft looks at that, the whole tech sector looks at that, and then you've got Amazon Web Services, so they are additionally training people the way that they want. Then you've got IBM, and then you've got these other next tier of things like Coursera and edX and Udemy. And these are different systems that are slowly chipping away at higher education. So you've slowly got these different credentialing systems that are popping up, having an effect. Now, this is not unprecedented. If you look at the tech sector, for a long time, there have been alternatives. So if you're in technology, you've probably heard of some of these like CompTIA's A+ or Security Plus. If you work for Cisco and you're a CCIE, you're probably or you know someone that's working with Cisco, they may be a CCIE. These are all certifications in the tech sector that are very specific to a thin slice of skill particular to some aspect of a job. That's the key, skill, right? So these things are looking at very specific skills. They identify skills. So IBM's program is interesting at the end.
Oh, at the end.
Yes, yes. So IBM has an interesting program with digital badges. So IBM started working with digital badges back in 2015. Even though badges were relatively new at that point in time, they said, let's test these digital badges and see what happens. And take a look at the numbers. So prior to versus after rolling out the digital badges, enrollment into programs went up, completion of programs went up, literally within months. And they found that digital badges, for various reasons, incent people to want to learn. So these are some of the this is a visual look at the IBM data, and you can see before versus after, those bars rise pretty quickly. Let's take a look at higher education. So for those of you in higher education, the AACSB is the premier accreditation for business schools. If you're not it, you want it, and if you are there, you flaunt it, basically, if you're AACSB. So look at what a critical person in AACSB said. Basically, digital credentials are going to emerge as a critical piece of higher education. So they're saying it. Even higher ed at higher levels recognizes that this is a critical piece of the future. New Zealand has an interesting program where it's a collaboration amongst various entities. And so in New Zealand, I thought it was kind of cool. They have a digital badge for like riding a tractor. And that sounds so silly, right? It sounds silly on its face. But the reality is that everything ultimately in the long run probably ends up as some sort of quantifiable skill. So you have a conglomerate here of different organizations working to build out a very intricate system of credentialing using digital badges. And then someone earlier today mentioned stackable credentials. So stackable credentials means we're going to take individual badges and kind of put those together and build a long-term track for someone. So I thought one of the things that came up at noon today that was interesting is, what's the future of education? And I think the folks on the panel were kind of afraid to say that maybe it's not what we have now. So maybe to become an accountant in the future, higher education says, well, instead of having 120 credit program, we're going to move to a series of credentials. And that sounds radically crazy right now, except I can tell you, I do a lot of consulting with McGraw-Hill. I am their top consultant for digital credentials. Just yesterday, I talked to 2 institutions. Texas A&M is looking to roll digital credentials through their whole business program, and I'm the consultant working on it. So this is the trend in higher ed. For the short run, we see that these things get merged together, simultaneously earning credits and credentials, but maybe in the long run, we move to a different type of credentialing system. And of course, this is 50 years from now, but the reality is the trend is moving quickly, even now as we speak. So there are other things impacting higher education. Continually rising costs. So I'm the associate coordinator of our online business program at Penn State World Campus. The number one thing we're focused on right now is how do we reduce costs for students? What do we do to get book costs down? What do we do to get other costs down? We're calling publishers and putting pressure on them to reduce the costs. So cost is paramount. NFTs, the third note there, NFTs. So think about this. This is kind of hot off the presses. This was just noted a few days ago. Pearson is one of the largest, actually the largest publisher, I believe, of higher education materials. Pearson has decided that they're not making any money off digital books, so they now have an NFT. You all know what that is based on the prior session. They all have NFTs associated with their books. So if I want to take a digital book and sell it, the NFT tracks that and allows Pearson to collect income off of that. The whole thing is upside down. The whole thing is completely different than what we've experienced in the past. And then, of course, we've got Gen Z thinking about things much differently than we've seen ever before. Just real quick, the platforms. Some of you may be thinking, okay, so what do I have to do to get into this? So just to give you a little technical background on this, there are various platforms up there. Credly, Accredible, Certify Me are the top ones. If you own a business or you're in an educational institution and you want to implement a program, you could do this. You can go to one of these institutions and they will help you put together a credentialing program. And if it's a few badges, it's free, up to, if you want to issue tens of thousands of badges, they'll do that for a price. So applications. This is one that I work with McGraw-Hill. I use this in Penn State's curriculum for teaching Excel. And so we can issue badges in the Excel class in addition to issuing college credits. So when students leave the class, they have not just the credits, but they also have a credential that they can put into their LinkedIn profile that says, I know this. Here's an example. They get something that looks like a certificate. If you click through my profile on LinkedIn, this is my credential for Excel, and it will tell when did I earn the credential and what are the specific skills that I have. Remember earlier, signaling and screening. So I signal, I know Excel, the employer says, I want pivot tables, you get the best of both worlds. Here's my credential for Excel, and in this list of skills at the bottom, you can't see it, but if you were to scroll down, it would say pivot tables. Frank knows them. It solves the problem. So how do I use digital credentials? I use it throughout the curriculum. So at the 200 level, I have an Excel class where I allow students to earn the digital credentials for Excel and Microsoft Access. At the 400 level, I have an internship prep class. They must have a LinkedIn profile. So I think it's unconscionable for a student to leave college today and not have a LinkedIn profile. So they have to have a LinkedIn profile, and my goal is to get as many badges on there. So I require one badge on their LinkedIn profile at a minimum through LinkedIn Learning. Those of you at institutions, you probably have a partnership with LinkedIn Learning. If you've got a relationship with Microsoft, it's almost a guarantee. And for free, the students can get a digital credential. So they must, before they ever enter their internship, have some sort of credentialing on their profile showing that they've got some level of expertise on something. And then from there, they can grow their credentials. So benefits, standardization of skills, because we speak different languages as individuals searching for a job versus those that are looking to hire people. We have to standardize the language. It will solve the hiring problem. How many of you folks, just a quick show of hands, how many of you have ever received a job offer out of the blue from a prospective employer? Just curious, how many have had that happen? How did that happen? Through LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, you can't get the offer, correct? So you must have students on LinkedIn, and they must have very complete LinkedIn profiles with as much credentialing as they possibly can. So this is this is part of a research project that I'm doing. This is what my model looks like. It's kind of a work in progress. This is part of my dissertation. And so very shortly, I'm going to be doing a survey. I've talked to SHRM, NEPA SHRM, and we're going to send a survey out. We'll send it, I'll have Don send it as well through TechBridge email to complete a survey. We're looking to understand how people feel about digital credentials. We want to know what the pulse is of people toward digital credentials. So some takeaways. Look for opportunities if you're in education, if you're in higher education, or even at the high school level. Why would you not start at the high school level? You want to start as early as you possibly can. Students should have LinkedIn profiles as early as they can. The day of the resume is almost over, folks, so we're very quickly coming to the end of it. Employers are going to be looking to LinkedIn. Get students started as early as you possibly can. Tie badges to career development at all levels. Gamification is the key. So why is this so effective for people? You heard about generations earlier today. Gen Z, Gen Y also, the millennials, as well as Alpha, which is after Gen Z. They respond very positively to gamification. That's all they know. That's not just what they do for recreation. If you're a 15-year-old kid, a 16-year-old kid, that's not just what you do for recreation, that's your socialization. That's how kids today socialize. And along the way, they earn badges. So this is not something we have to teach them. When you earn a badge, the endorphins get shot into your brain and you feel good about it. And that's why badges are so effective. Okay, so Jim, you had a question, you're up.
I did. Applied technical skills, badges, and certifications, they've been around a decade or more, right? Even when I was still practicing, we would sometimes run across it. What, though, have you run across? What inroads in, thank you, what inroads in badging or certifications, badge making, to soft skills signaling and credentialing have you seen, if any?
Minimal.
Minimal so far.
The soft skill side is very minimal. We are in, think of this as 1912 automobile industry, right? Everybody's kind of getting in, very little standardization, half of them aren't that good. So we're in the earliest days of credentialing, digital credentialing. So there's very little for soft skills at this point in time. A huge opportunity for someone to quantify that. The problem is to do it, you've got to test people. So how do you test someone on the fact that they're great at talking to people or they're personable, speaking, right? So those are harder things to assess. And for a digital badge / credential to be effective, the test also has to be rigorous. We don't just want to assign these out without any type of rigor. So there's a lot of complications that go along with this, which is why higher education is positioned exceptionally well to do this, because that's what they do, right? So this is not something that higher ed cannot or should not be involved in. It's something they have to figure out how to leverage.
There's some complementary opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Frank.
You're welcome.
Liz Finley. I was wondering if there's a set standard for earning this badge. Like, it's the same metric across all platforms, or if it's a or if it's like a very subjective thing.
So on this specific one, which is the one that I've attained and which I give to my students, this one is you have to complete a project, a graded project, which is graded by an artificial intelligence grader, by a computer, that tells you yay or nay on the skills, and if you get a 90% on that, you have attained the digital badge. So that, in that case, that's one that has pretty defined skill set that it's looking for, that it can test for. I have another credential that is for online teaching, which was a 2-week certification that I took, which was really soft, and there was not a hard skill set that they were testing there. And that one doesn't really have the same necessarily level of rigor associated with the testing on it. So it changes by credential to answer that question. Does that help?
Yeah, I didn't know if like your standard, like you award that badge, but say I award someone a badge, do we have the same?
Because that's from a publisher, McGraw-Hill, it would be universal across the board for that specific credential. Everybody would have to attain a 90 in exactly the same way. You're welcome.
Hi, Ray Knob. You actually mentioned specifically with accounting, and I know it was just an example, but do you see that not only employers but like licensing boards, like the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, do you see them kind of getting more on board with this digital badging as opposed to saying having the 150 credit hour requirement? Just say, oh, you're proficient in these levels, you're good enough to sit for the exam, or just issue it at that point.
I think that's what it would be. It would be stackable credentials, and this is far into the future, right? So you'd have various micro credentials that would stack up to a point that says, all right, you're ready to sit for the real test, the CPA exam. But there's also other uses for this, and I'll give you an example that's tied to accounting. I published a piece last year in the PICPA, the Pennsylvania CPA Journal, I published an article there. And so I joined at that time because I was getting the piece published. And they assigned me a badge for that, which I was like, ooh, I get a badge for this. This is cool. I did not pay my subscription, and they took my badge away. I'm a little upset about that. Those damn accountants. Sorry, I didn't mean to curse. So yes, so there's all sorts of applications. This is why the NFT thing, I was the only expert. So NFTs have a lot of applicability here because they actually are complementary to the way that digital credentials work.
Frank. So I got a couple. So you said you like to be controversial.
Love it. Let's
Okay.
do it.
Let's play for a second. Did I hear you say that you are an advocate of high school students using LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Are you also an advocate of answering the question on how we get high school students the training so that they put profiles out that actually are meaningful and they use LinkedIn in an appropriate fashion? Because that's the big gap.
Yes. Yeah, it's a difficult question. I will tell you honestly.
Oh, no, it's not a difficult question.
At the collegiate level, I'm brutal in terms of what I require for LinkedIn profile. I will have students that will come close to not passing my class because they put together a half-baked LinkedIn profile. So I have a very defined rubric. Quite honestly, I'll give you my rubric. Just use that. Do they have a professional photo? Do they have a title? Do they have the high school that they graduated from? The thing that is different from LinkedIn versus a resume, a lot of times students and others will say, well, should I take my job from 20 years ago off of my LinkedIn profile? No, you shouldn't. That's an old resume thing because you were limited to 2 pages of resume. It doesn't matter. Now that random skill that you had 20 years ago might get you an interesting job today because it's basically mixed in with these other skills that come together.
So let me just stay with that for a second. Did you say high school graduate or did you say high school student?
I don't know why you wouldn't start at age 7. Like, why would you not start as early as you can? Now, there's legal. You can't join until you're 14 or 15 or whatever. But in reality, why would you not start? So we have a winner of the high school business plan competition. This should be on all of the skills that you have from having gone through that. Like, you're talking about intellectual property. Most adults can't talk about intellectual property. That should be on your LinkedIn profile.
How does the dad of the high school business plan competition winner feel about that?
This should be good.
I will say this, yeah, because I'm a teacher at Crestwood School District. I know one of the issues that we have at the high school level is in the past it was trying to get students to prepare something. So now there's a focus on trying them to get a portfolio together. I don't know if LinkedIn is part of that, but I know at least at our school district, it's sporadic. If the students have a business course, and not all of them do, we have 3 business teachers. They're the ones that are usually in charge of working with the students to try to get them to get their portfolio together. But there's a big gap there because many of our students, although they might like the business courses, don't have the opportunity to take it because of the other courses that they're taking. So I think it's a good idea. In reality, I don't know. It's something I'll mention to my business teachers and see what they think.
Well, you have to take small victories before you get the large victories, right? So I would have a defined rubric, start that with the willing, right? And you get them to do it. And then you have a case study for why you should do it, and then you get it to those that aren't, and it becomes part of the curriculum. If you don't make it part of the curriculum, they're not going to do it, right? So you've got to get it into the curriculum ultimately.
Frank, my other question, just to wrap up because we're getting to that point, would you tell everybody about your PhD research, please?
Yeah, so even though I'm saying like, hey, it's the end of college, right? We don't need this thing anymore. I'm an advocate of education, and I'm pursuing a doctorate at Drexel, and so this became part of my research for that. So I'm not anti-education, even though sometimes my tone may sound like it. We need to change with times, right? And that's part of the research, is to determine if this is truly a viable path to move toward in terms of how we can look at education. Thank you, Don.
And that ends the breakout sessions for today.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so allow me to end where I started with you guys, which is thank you for coming today. I hope you learned something. I hope you connected with somebody. I hope you met somebody new and different. But I also hope that you join us at Lackawanna College in a half hour, which is 2 blocks away, 409 on Adams, because there are student chefs who are going to demonstrate their experiential learning in food, drinks, and pastries, hydroponics, and food insecurity. So some pretty interesting things. If you can make the effort to stop in, it will be well worth it, and it will put a nice bow on the day. Thank you so much for coming. Happy to stick around and answer any questions. Frank, thank you. Energetic as always. Thanks to everyone today. Kate, you started it off on a great note, and Frank, you ended it on a great note. John, in the middle, thank you so much. Thank you so much today.